Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cleveland Browns Practice Report, live from Berea. Brendan Gulick with you on Thursday, November 9th, 2023. Getting ready for the Baltimore Ravens this weekend as the Browns head out to the East Coast to take on a Ravens team that is, frankly, probably playing, if not like one of the best teams in the NFL, maybe one of the top three. They are certainly as good as advertised, and the Browns are anxious for a chance to go out and knock off a team that is playing really well because, frankly, Cleveland's playing pretty well too, and they're coming off of a terrific performance. We had a chance to talk to a number of guys that played well in that game this past weekend, the shutout win over a rookie quarterback-led Arizona Cardinals team. All right, we talked to Denzel Ward, Grant Delpit, Joel Bitonio, and Amari Cooper in the locker room. I also spoke off camera with Leroy Watson, one of the team's tackles that they have recently signed, because there's obviously a lot going on the offensive line that will continue to be part of the conversation this week. As we shoot this, the team is out on the practice field right now. I can tell you that I saw Greg Newsome back at practice today and saw Pierre Strong back at practice today. DeJuan Jones was not practicing this afternoon. Don't know what that means about his status for this weekend, but I know he was not on the practice field for the second day in a row, so we'll keep our eye on DeJuan Jones. That means that there's a lot of moving pieces, right, on that offensive line. I have to think that James Hudson is going to play in some capacity, but in what capacity and at what position, I guess we'll find out. Seems logical that given that he seems like the next man up in the last few weeks as a reserve, that he would probably be a starter this weekend. But that's I think that's just an educated guess. The team certainly hasn't said that. In talking to Joel Bitonio, he acknowledged that, look, he's basically one of their emergency tackles, and if he has to move, he will. I don't think anybody wants to necessarily change the five, or I should say the interior three linemen. But Joel Bitonio said they're trying to get the five best linemen, the right combination out there on the field this weekend, and he'll play whatever role he needs to. He also spoke really highly of his time so far with Leroy Watson, who, when I asked, after some of the formal interviews were over, I went over and spoke with Leroy. Really nice kid. And I am hopeful that he enjoys his time here. He said he's settling in nicely. He really likes the offensive line room. And he said immediately upon getting here, Joel Bitonio was one of the guys that kind of took him under his wing, because you never know if your number's going to get called. And he said, I've had some interesting experiences along the way in Atlanta and San Francisco, and I'll be ready if I'm asked to play here. So we'll see if Leroy Watson is potentially part of the Browns equation at offensive tackle this weekend. Amari Cooper, well, the highlight from what he told us was that, I think, at least in my opinion anyways, he said the second deep ball that Deshaun Watson threw him this past weekend, the one that by now you probably famously have heard they drew up in the dirt, he said that was probably the best deep ball he's ever caught because the pass was so perfect. I thought Deshaun Watson threw a number of really, really good balls this weekend, but nobody would argue that one is probably at the top of the list in terms of its length and its accuracy and its timing. It was just perfect. So it was fun to hear Amari Cooper acknowledge that too. And he also said that, the reality is when you put those kinds of plays on tape, it makes an opposing defense have to respect the fact that you can, even if the Browns haven't had a tendency in recent weeks to do that a lot. So it was important for them to make sure they connected on some of those to get those on film. Denzel Ward, boy, an interesting thing for Denzel because he's playing terrific football, maybe even the best of his career. And he said he's kind of relishing the fact that a lot of these other defensive backs are looking to him for leadership. And he said it's a little weird because he hasn't been in the league that long in the grand scheme of things, right? He's not necessarily like an old, savvy NFL veteran, but he's a pretty darn established player, and obviously he's being compensated like it, right? He's had a fabulous start to his NFL career, and the hope is that he's going to continue to play like that for a long time. But I thought it was pretty cool, his perspective of, hey, man, I'm not that old yet, but guys are looking to me to lead this room. And Juan Thornhill called him the best defensive back in football, which I thought was pretty cool. And Denzel certainly seemed to appreciate that high praise as well. And for Ohio State fans, Denzel acknowledged the fact that his time in Columbus really helped solidify his work habits and his readiness to not just play in the NFL, but to excel here. He really he spoke very highly of his time in Columbus as he as he tried to launch his professional career. So thought that was cool too. And then lastly, we talked to Grant Delpit, and we're going to play something here for you from Grant. I had a chance to ask him about the fact that they are obviously under a defensive coordinator change this year, and I wondered if his personal success and the team's success at large was due to more of a schematic change or perhaps more due to a change in attitude. Here's what he had to say.
Yeah, that's two peas in a pod, man. So that's you got to have both to be an elite defense. We have the right coach for it. Schwartz, he preaches that, playing with attitude and knowing your assignment. So, in order to be a great defense, man, you got to have that chemistry and you got to have the attitude and swag. So I think we have both, man. We got to keep it rolling throughout the season.
Is attitude the biggest difference this year, or is it something different?
Well, I don't know. It's a lot of little differences that make a big difference, So I can't pinpoint each one of them, but I do feel like we had an attitude that nobody's better than us. So that always helps.
I love that they had that attitude. They should have that attitude. If you want to win in the NFL, you got to believe you're the absolute best, especially if you're on the defensive side. And I can tell you the Browns certainly, that's not just lip service. That's something they truly feel. And look, they've played like it largely this year, which is great. They've backed it up. But there's something to be said for having that mentality when you go into a game. There were a lot of questions asked today of players and coaches about the fact that, hey, look, you might be a defensive player, you don't play against the other team's defense, but do you feel like maybe there is an element of this that is, your defense against their defense? And everybody kind of said no. It's recognizing that there are two elite defenses going at it this weekend with two offenses that certainly have some capability and two offenses that look a little bit different. Lamar Jackson, certainly one of the best players in the NFL. And when he's at his best, he's really tough. The Browns feel like when they're at their best that they can beat anybody. And we've already seen that this year. They beat San Francisco. This team is obviously showcasing right now a pretty impressive stretch of football. I know they ultimately slipped once against Seattle, but this last month has been really, really good. So get the impression that the Browns are certainly not afraid of going into Baltimore and trying to cause a little chaos. We'll put it that way. All right, we did have a chance to talk with all the coordinators today as well. There was an open locker room earlier, and then all three coordinators spoke. Bubba Ventrone obviously said, look, the couple special teams penalties last week weren't good, but we'll work on getting those fixed for sure. And he was extremely complimentary of Baltimore's special teams unit, as he should be, because frankly, over the last 10 to 15 years, there are not many special teams units that have been more consistent than what we've seen from Baltimore. So he certainly said he admires what they've done and wants to model a lot of what he's seen in New England and in Baltimore because he really admired their commitment to fundamentals in particular on special teams. And we have his full press conference for you here on our YouTube channel if you're interested in that. Alex Van Pelt also spoke, and I thought he was pretty straightforward in saying it was nice to have Deshaun back. Felt like there were a lot of really good moments there that made it feel like Deshaun looked like his normal self, but maybe wasn't perfect. But looking forward to seeing the leap that he takes this week. That was probably the biggest takeaway there from AVP today. And then as far as Jim Schwartz goes, he was asked about the last time they played the Ravens, where defensively they ultimately weren't good enough in a 28-3 loss. He was asked, what can you do better this time around? And he kind of laughed and he said, I'm going to let the Ravens figure that out on their own. I'm not going to give them any ammo that they don't need from us. But he did also go on and talk a little bit about the play of the defensive line, specifically at tackle. The defensive tackles this year maybe have gotten a bit more spotlight than you normally would see. But in particular, Shelby Harris and Dalvin Tomlinson played great this past weekend. He was quick to point out the depth on the line. Here's what Coach Schwartz had to say about those guys.
All of our tackles played well. Those guys stood out a little bit more on the stat sheet, but Jordan played very well, and as did Mo. So we're at our best when we stop the run. Those guys have a lot to do with that, being physical, knocking blockers back, being able to turn a game one-dimensional, is big for us. And, I just go back and you watch all the games that we've been able to control the first and second down run game. We've played well on defense, and we've been able to get sacks. If you don't control the first and second down pass game, you're not going to be able to get after the passer the way that we want it. Those guys have a lot to do with it. Dalvin, it's hard. Defensive tackles generally don't get, Aaron Donald's aside, generally don't get a lot of sacks. But to get 2.5 in that game and be around the quarterback and make the plays that he did, you guys understand, how respected and how valuable a guy Dalvin is, not just on the field, but in the locker room. And it was really fun to watch him, have success in that game and lead us to a win. And, sort of the unsung heroes of our team. I think a couple of weeks ago, I might have said something to the effect of like Dalvin didn't fill up the stat sheet, but he had a lot to do with us having a good game. Well, this game he was able to fill up the stat sheet still. So he's a valuable player for us, as all those tackles. We're getting really good contributions out of all those guys. They're not selfish. They split reps, but it keeps them fresh. And production is the only thing that we really worry about.
Well, they've gotten great production from that group for sure, and the reality is they're going to need it again this weekend if they want to beat Baltimore, because this Ravens team has done such a good job the first 9 weeks of the season of controlling the line of scrimmage. So I think Cleveland's defensive line probably should put a lot of this game on their shoulders and say, look, we are going to clamp down when we get to Baltimore and try to control the line and give the offense, good field position and not let Baltimore just drive up and down the field against them at will. So nice to see the appreciation for the big guys. That's for sure. Okay, tomorrow at 10:20, we'll have a chance to hear from tight ends coach T.C. McCartney and from defensive line coach Ben Bloom. They'll address the media again around 10:20 tomorrow morning. Practice is scheduled for 11:30 tomorrow, and then as is usually the case on Fridays, Kevin Stefanski will come in and speak immediately after practice, and then the media will be allowed to go into the locker room after that. Ordinarily, we hear from Myles Garrett on Fridays. We've historically also heard from Elijah Moore. We'll have to see who else is available tomorrow, but would expect that those guys are likely going to be available to us. And when I say us, tomorrow, I don't mean me. Spencer German will be here tomorrow to give you all the latest from Berea. Okay, thanks for joining us here for the Cleveland Browns practice report from Berea. I'm Brendan Gulick. For all the latest news and info on the team, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out our content over on BrownsDigest.com.